So in chapter 33, verse 13, it begins the blessing of Joseph. It says, and about Joseph, he said, meaning Moses said, may his land be blessed by the eternal, with sweet delicacies, produced by the dew of the heavens, and from the deep, by the well springs lying beneath the earth. So it's a wonderful blessing in that, well, it's talking obviously just the simple understanding. It's talking about crops, it's talking about agriculture, and that there will be a blessing of rain from above that will, properly bring moisture and hydrate the ground and the crops and the vineyards and orchards and so on. But also there'll be also water from below, from wells, underground springs on his land. So the land will be moisturized, shall I say, hydrated from both heaven and from the earth. I mean, from a Hasidic perspective, I see this as an allusion to the fact that, both heavenly blessings coming from heaven, blessings coming from the person, meaning from the person's soul or from the person's deep inside their own talents. In other words, there's going to be a downward flow of inspiration from above, that's from the heavens. And so that's really something that is, kind of transcends the person, but also from deep from within. And these are, I think we've probably spoken about this quite a few times, but from above is generally a metaphor for Torah study, because in a certain sense, the person is a receptor for Torah's wisdom and for basically a revelation of coming in contact with God. So the person simply has to kind of listen, right? So that's more passive. The person has to listen and absorb the wisdom of Torah, of God's wisdom. And from a Hasidic perspective, there's within the Torah is not just wisdom, but a kind of a, for lack of a better term, a light, a bridge between man and God, which is beyond the person's ability to understand, which makes them a different person. That's kind of the idea of light. When we sit in the sun, we feel warm, we often feel more at peace. And obviously it brings clarity. We're able to see things in the sunlight we don't see in the darkness. In the darkness, we can confuse things, think we see something that we don't see. For these reasons and many more reasons, a divine revelation is called light. It's also called light because, it's emanating from a source, and compared to that source, it's, first of all, it remains connected to the source, which is why it's called light. Just like sunlight connected to the sun's orb, it's radiating from the orb. Without the orb, it couldn't exist. So the connection we have with God is called a radiance because it's coming from His essence, but it's so diluted. It has to be diluted because we can't come in contact with the infinite, omnipotent God. So God hides Himself and reveals, a small amount that we can handle. So that's from above, the blessing of the land, of sweet delicacies from above. And from the below is a person's exertion to bring out his talents of his soul, of his identity from within and try to reach out towards God above, right? There's something, what does the well do? It springs up from below and forces its way to the surface. If you think about it, in a certain sense, the wellspring from below has to have a lot more power to come to the surface than the rain from above, because the rain comes down, scientifically, there's gravity, right? It's basically the water condenses there and then it begins to drop, and, there's a lot more to it, I'm sure. But in terms of once it exists in the clouds and so on, it comes down, reaches a certain temperature, reaches a certain volume, and it comes down. However, the water from below has to have a lot of pressure and something pushing it. So there has to be a lot of pressure to push it up because it's going against gravity. so too the service of prayer is compared to this type of wellspring, which the person is pushing up, grasping towards God, trying to change themselves on their own. Basically meaning trying to focus, be God focused when their mind is going everywhere else, thinking about their problems and their situations. And the person naturally is their heart is stuck in their life and their needs. And the person tries to silence that voice and tries to connect to truth, tries to connect to God. And that's what the prayers to a great extent are about, is to talk about ideas of faith, how God is a source of blessing, and to the person to have gratitude, to think about that God is the creator and that all of creation is praising him, and to praise him for all his works, so that the person silences his business needs, family needs, and whatever, and refocuses on God, and which is a truth, just that we're not focused on it. And I've talked about this idea before. I see it with, for example, animals, like, if you have pets, there's a lot of things that they don't pay attention to so much. But when it comes to food or another animal or something, all of a sudden they're very stimulated, very stimulated. So in other words, the things focused on their needs, they're very hyper aware of, and other things they completely gloss over. And human being, the animal side of a person is the same. Their personal needs, they're very much aware of, but this hidden aspect of the person, of that God is providing those needs, the person isn't paying a lot of attention to naturally. And so this is a lot of work the person has to put in to change their nature, or at least, to bring out the hidden nature, the hidden Jew, so to speak, within. And that goes for a person who is Jewish, and it goes for a person who isn't Jewish. The point is to bring out the Abraham, right? The part of us that recognizes his creator, to bring out the Abraham in every person. And so that's the idea of the wellspring from below. It's an incredible, nice metaphor, because there's water is present, but it has to come out, right? So in other words, the Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob recognize the creator and appreciate him in different ways. Abraham focused on loving God's loving kindness. Isaac saw God's judgment in the world and order, right? He saw both, but the point is they seem to focus very much on this aspect. And Jacob saw the combination of these two elements together in compassion. So, in other words, they saw God's working and had a deep relationship with him, and we're servants of him. So we connect to this well, and we try to bring it out through our own work. So we have to dig deep to bring it out. And so that's prayer. So interesting, if you think about prayer, I mean, that's the thing. Like Torah, we get so much out of Torah study. And Torah study is like a battery. You plug in, and boom, you're going. You're moving. You're just getting all this energy. And prayer, though, on the other hand, is like our work. And God really wants our work, even though it's something hard for us to understand. But why God needs our work, but he really wants it. He really wants us to try to reach out towards him and try to change ourselves and do what we can do. And once we do as much as we can do, or even not as much, do a lot, put in some effort, he responds. So from both of these things come delicacies, both from the rains and from the wells below. Sweet delicacies emerge. Now, it says here, Rashi comments on the words, "May his land be blessed by the Eternal." It says, "Of all the portions of the tribes, there was none as full of all types of goodness as the land of Joseph." So Joseph's land was unique. At least this is the way I'm hearing this. Rashi's comment is that he had everything. He had all types of good. So, just to think it in biblical terms, what does this mean? He had olives and grapes and grains, right? And figs and dates, like all the 7 species, he had them all growing really beautifully. Everything existed over there. And not only was it there, it was full of all types of goodness. Like it was just the best. It was, I mean, I don't know if he says it was the absolute best, but it says here in the verse, the greatest, the delicacies. Yeah, and there's a comment in the explanation from a commentator on Rashi called Be'er Basadeh, a well in the field. It's the name of a commentator, and he says there's a footnote summarizing his comment. He says the land of Israel as a whole is a land flowing with milk and honey. Every part of the land possesses one or more types of delicacy. However, no part of the land contained every type of delicacy except for Joseph's. So Joseph's land had every delicacy. That's fascinating. It made me think about Joseph and the brothers, and you can understand a little bit their jealousy. And I think Joseph represents the children of Israel, the Jewish people as a whole. If you think about today, what do you hear? You hear, oh, the Jews are in science, the Jews are in literature, the Jews are in Hollywood, the Jews are in politics. I mean, you name it, there are Jews there who are successful there. So that's kind of the attribute of Joseph. His delicacy in everything. He's present all over. Of course, that brings a lot of resentment, right? And so similarly, maybe, I mean, you could say that the brothers had a sense of this also, in which they resented. But obviously, they resented the fact that he talked about being a king. But as we all know, if someone who is unworthy, talks about being a king, nobody's disturbed because they're not threatened. But in Joseph's case, they felt threatened because everyone who looked at him and had a certain quality, he seemed to have the same thing. So that caused a lot of discomfort, right? I mean, this just seems to me. Anyway, the verse here doesn't say this. It's a little bit my speculation. But if you think about the things we know about Joseph, it makes a lot of sense. Think of what his father gave him, the coat of many colors. Why did he give him a coat of many colors? Because he had a lot of talents, right? It would represent a lot of different elements that he would have. And if you think about it also, isn't that something a leader really should have? He should have a lot of different talents because he's going to have to deal and be a leader and direct a lot of different elements of national life or communal life. He has to be military, has to be agricultural, has to be family, has to be religious. I mean, you name it, he has to have an opinion about it. And he has to feel connected and be able to relate to it, in a way where he can succeed. So Joseph seemed to have these qualities. Of course, we have to question then why then in that case was the kingship given to Judah? If Joseph had all these wonderful qualities, why did he lose the kingship? Or why was it given to someone else in the end? And we do see that Joseph, the tribes made a separate kingdom for a while and so on and so forth. So they were clearly very influential. They're very influential. Joshua was from Ephraim. And right, I think was it Gideon? I believe was from Manasseh. Yeah. Manasseh is said in English, called in English. But Manasseh, Gideon was from the tribe of Manasseh, and Joshua was from the tribe of Ephraim. So we had some very, very great leaders from Joseph for sure. So we have to come back to this idea, but I think we also have to know that Israel in general is called Joseph. In certain verses in Psalms, and But no, we'll have to get back to where exactly. You could maybe try to Google it. But the tribes are there. There are occasions when, for example, the Jewish people are called Ephraim, famously, right? My precious son Ephraim, God calls Israel. That the fact that he yearns to have Ephraim return. So Ephraim is singled out to represent all of Israel. So anyway, so Joseph represents this quality of, I guess you could say he has a tremendous aptitude at so many different things. And so from a certain element that has to do with kingship. Now, but that's not really the final view of things from a Kabbalistic perspective, and obviously not from a biblical perspective, because the kingship goes to David. So how can we understand this? And what does David represent? And it's well known. It says later on, I mean, Judah represents, the penitent. I mean, in English, the person who's returning, who made mistakes, who corrects those mistakes, but he represents humility. And, in Hasidic thinking, humility is even stronger than, has even more potential than the person of many qualities himself, because the idea of humility is, in this case, it's talking about someone who's, again, makes himself, humble before God, and makes himself a receptor for God. And that person, through that, can reach greater heights than the person who has natural talents. Since God is Ein Sof, is unlimited, and the person's bond with God that comes about through his own self-nullification brings the person to a higher level. But it's also more necessary to create the bond between the nation and God than talents are. And talents can go wrong, again, because talents can come with ego. We need talents, don't get me wrong. And that's why there has to be a synthesis between Joseph and Judah. We need both. But the king, who rules though? The ruler is humility. Humility has to rule, not the talents. And this is also a lesson that is very much for the nations and has to do with the sukkah. I want to make one more before we move on to that point about the sukkah and humility, which is extremely fundamental to this holiday. I wanted to make an interesting observation that I saw here also in today's reading. It says in verse 17, it says that the regal one who descended from him, from Joseph and others, who is as strong as an ox, majesty has been granted him, and his horns are like the horns of a re'im. So there's an interesting comment here in Rashi that the offspring, descendant of Joseph, his horns will be like an ox, meaning he's going to be very strong. But they're also like a re'im. Re'im was a wild ox of the time. The animal is extinct now, as far as we know. There was some kind of a giant oxen. It was a wild oxen. It was called a re'im, or re'im. And it says that its horns were beautiful. I'm speculating to say it was beautiful because it was probably like those rams. It was probably curled. It was probably long. Now, a very long curled horn would tend to be weaker than a shorter, firmer horn that the animal can gore and cause a lot more damage with a sharp, shorter horn than the curled, longer horn that can maybe fall off, that's heavier on the animal's body. I mean, I'm kind of just using my common sense to understand it, but so it says that the descendants of Joseph will be both strong, and also their strength will be beautiful. So I guess my question is, what is the significance and meaning of the idea of their strength being beautiful? What is this? What does this mean? So I think this is the idea behind this. So what is the human emotion that is triggered by strength? If someone has superior strength to you, in reality, it's fear. Person is afraid of being attacked, or there's a certain amount of what's the word? Intimidation. Person is bigger, stronger. You naturally feel a little bit intimidated. It's human nature. It's like animals probably feel the same way. What about beauty? Something beautiful. Admiration is what you feel, right? So I think the point here is this is a wonderful blessing, saying that you're going to be strong and admired. You're not just going to be feared, but you'll be admired. And that helps people deal with the fact that you're going to lead them and they're going to follow your instructions, because you'll be admired by them. So, and this is something that leaders need to have. They need to have both. Not to be feared, but also admired. If you're only feared, that's not really full leadership. People need to admire you to follow you. And I think this is also a point talking about in time to come, that the Jewish people will be both feared, but admired in a positive sense, and they'll become to be respected. And that will put them in a position, kind of like a teacher, in order to teach all the nations of the world. You can say it in another way. It's interesting that, because, what is Israel in simple terms? It says that famously, the author of the Kuzari, he said that Israel is the heart of the nations. It's that for all the nations of the world, Israel acts as the heart of humanity. So, what is the idea of the heart of humanity? So, the heart of the inside of a human being, what gives the person energy should be its moral identity, its values. That's the source, and everything kind of flows from the values of the community. So that's Israel's main purpose, not to be, a doctor, lawyer, whatever, physicist. These are, again, outgrowths, I guess, of various different. I'm not going to say that they're not something that will exist in the time to come, but it's not real. It's not Israel's primary role. Primarily, Israel's role is to act as this type of a moral and divine teacher. So, in other words, and it's interesting that the Torah itself has these two qualities. It's Bechor Shoro Hadar Lo. It's like the horns of an ox, because it's extremely serious. In certain ways, it can be intimidating. People don't want to think about the seriousness of life and responsibility. At the same time, it's also attractive. It's also something that once people see it and come in contact with it, it's attractive. It has a certain pleasantness to it. And similarly, as it says an interesting thing here, actually, later on in the blessings about Zebulun, that the nations will come to do business with Zebulun. They'll come to the port cities of Zebulun. And once they get there, they say, you know what, once we're here already, let's go to Jerusalem and let's see about the deity of these people. And it says they go to Jerusalem and they see everybody worshiping the same way, everybody eating the same food, and everybody, trying to think what else, but anyway, living together in harmony. And they say, this is a great nation. I want to join this nation. And they convert. So it's very interesting. First of all, it says nothing about, any type of theological conclusions that they're making. They're making conclusions based on social human interests. They're saying, this is so nice. Everyone's just together. They're not all separate and have different gods and everything. We don't see the kind of division we see in other places. I really like it. I want to be part of this nation. And then they convert. So we don't decide halacha based on a midrash. So, but if we did, I would say that this seems to imply that it's okay to begin their journey toward Judaism based on just an admiration for the people, even though it's nothing to do with the religion. That seems to be what it implies. But again, we don't make halachic decisions based on a midrash. However, the point I wanted to bring out from this is that, again, there's a certain admiration, there's a certain pleasantness, there's a certain sweet taste to Jewish culture, to Torah culture, that the nations, become exposed to and will become exposed to in the future. That goes together with the fact that, think about Messianic times, you hear about there's going to be a war, the enemies of Israel are going to be vanquished. So there's a certain intimidation, a certain fear. Oh, wow, God is protecting these people. We better back off, right? We better not try to take advantage of them in any way. After the Gog and Magog and all these terrible, and there'll be the hand of God will be out in the open. So that's like the oxen's horn. There's intimidation. At the same time, there's going to be admiration. So again, it represents Torah itself, I think, and also represents the future relationship between Israel and the nations. And this is going to be a helpful thing because the humility that it will bring, will help shake up the nations to pay attention to Israel's message, and and to be willing to listen. I mean, in many ways, the stories we see of the Jewish people in the desert, for example, are not dissimilar to this aspect of human nature, that they need to be humbled sometimes, get a little bit of shock, so that they can hear the divine message. With the different times that Israel was punished in the desert, is that kind of an idea. They weren't punished just because God. Weren't punished because God just was angry and he lost it. That's how people think, because it says there God became angry. But in our tradition, that's not how we understand the text. We understand the text that it's talking about God showed himself angry in order to, because unfortunately, because of human nature, it was necessary for various reasons in order to shake the people up and get them back on track. At least that's really the most important aspect of punishment, is correction. Okay, anyway, so on this note, as Joseph represents so many of the aspects that we see in general in the Jewish people, and that will be open in time, revealed in the time to come. Let's talk a little bit, go back to Sukkah and go back to this holiday. As is well known that, there's a connection between the nations and this holiday of Sukkot. And, one of the biggest themes in this holiday is unity. Unity. It says that all of Israel can sit in one sukkah. The sukkah itself, it fully encompasses the person. So what's the idea of encompassing a person? The idea, at least one idea, it's similar kind of like a mikveh. You're completely immersed in the sukkah. It's all around you. And that brings a certain degree of nullification, certain degree of humility, ego effacement, so to speak, but again, in a positive way, where there's a transcendence in the sukkah, where the person is part of the sukkah reality. He becomes, he's around. The air you're breathing in is the holy air of the sukkah, and it's all around you. So there's a certain aspect of that. There's also the aspect of the recognition, obviously, that God is actually our protector and provider, and everything. We're going out of our home so that we're getting a distance. It's kind of a little bit of like a little bit of an exile. A person's leaving their home and going out of there and going into an environment that reminds him of the fact that he's under God's protection, and all the things he have it's really was brought about by God. It's not himself. And so these are messages that are extremely important for all of mankind. And so the point is that our individualism it's not stifled by the sukkah, it's just redirected. The sukkah in a certain sense represents the big idea that God is king of the earth, meaning to say that he has that he's in charge, and he has instructions and a mission for us, and is the creator of this world, and wishes to see it go in a certain direction, and so on. But and also is concerned for his creation and loves his creation. So you have both aspects. I mean, a king, and that's the thing about a king as opposed to a dictator, is a king feels a deep connection to his subjects. It's not only that he has ultimate control and can get rid of somebody at will, but the main point is he's so connected. And again, there's that aspect of the Re'im's horns. There's such an admiration for a king. There's a feeling that the king represents the honor of the whole nation. I mean, you still see that like in England, right? I mean, all the pageantry, and people love it because it represents a certain honor that everybody has a part in. And in the United States, democracies have chosen to go on a different route for various very very sensible reasons. But this aspect is of course missing. That we don't have that type of reverence, or the type of that is represented. The king represents the whole nation. And we had to have that idea in Judaism. Rashi brings it here and there that the prince, the Nasi, the leader, he's everything. He's the whole nation. He embodies the nation. Moses embodied the whole nation. And so too later Jewish leaders, they embodied the nation. So again, that's kind of like the kingdom of below. It parallels the kingdom above. And so basically, God being our king uplifts us all. It uplifts everyone because he's involved with us, and there's this bond and covenant with us. He treats us, although not as a full equal, because he's the king and we're a subject, but at the same time, there's a relationship of recognition, responsibility. He feels responsible for us, right? He cares about us, and we in exchange honor him, love him, and so on. So it's relationship. A dictator, there's no relationship. It's coerced, it's forced, and it's only fear. King is a different thing. So that's the kind of feeling is supposed to be ingested in the sukkah. And this brings to humility of the person. It brings to us being focused on, one united goal. And it's something everyone joins together in. And everybody understands that, they have their function and they have their purpose, and we all work together. But even more than that, the idea of the sukkah is that we really are one whole. And that is really brought out with the idea of the Kabbalistic idea of blessing the four species in the sukkah itself. So the four species are different and they're brought together, right? So the sukkah itself is one whole. You don't see it as different. You don't call the roof and the walls two different things. It's one thing. And everything inside becomes kind of like the inside of the sukkah. As I said before, like you become nullified. It's kind of like you're living, breathing the sukkah. In other words, the sukkah is a unity that doesn't have any. It's not a unity made up of separate parts. It's a unity that's a perfect unity. The species represents differences that are brought together and work together. Bringing them into the sukkah represents the idea that the deeper reality is all those different parts are really one whole. Really. And so obviously this is an amazing, and that you could say is going to be the conclusion of the nations and the end of days. Some of the is that they understand that they have a very important purpose, and that purpose only they can do. And but they're working together with the Jewish people, with Israel, to accomplish this thing, to accomplish God's will. And there are different functions. And people will not disrespect each other or feel like they have a more important job than someone else, because everyone is doing, again, there'll be a tremendous humility and a tremendous feeling of being mission conscious as opposed to self-conscious and my own ambition, will from that perspective, self-centered ambition will have disappeared, and everyone will be working together in a harmony. And yet without a repression, or without feeling repressed, expressing their talents in a way where they can also yet recognize that other people have purpose, other creations have a purpose, and recognize the value of those things as well. Obviously, this is something really that we can do only through a godly recognition. Why do I say that? Because if we look at the things without God, certain things have greater status than other things. However, if we're part of a whole, a godly created whole, and everything we see is kind of functioning as different, how do we say, mechanisms in God's whole, so that makes it completely different all of a sudden, because it's kind of God's handiwork that, it's like the famous story, right? It's a famous story of one of the great rabbis who was walking on the ocean after finishing a lot of tractates. He feels evidently there was a bit of, self-importance or pride. There's something seeped in a little bit, maybe you might say. It seems to be the impression the Talmud is trying to give. He passes by, and a simple person passes by and says hello to him. Peace be unto you, my teacher. And he turns to him and he sees a very, very ugly person, and he says to him, wow. He says, how did you become such an ugly person? How did you, why are you so unpleasant looking, or something like that? And so the person said back to him, said, if you have any complaints, why don't you go back to the one who created me and complain to him? So immediately the rabbi got very shaken. He realized that he did something really, really wrong. And he got off his horse or something, and he begged this man forgiveness for miles until they reached the city, and he wouldn't forgive him. He wouldn't forgive him. It's a very famous story. And people were seeing this, and people were saying, please forgive him. He's a great teacher in Israel. And he said, I won't forgive him. May there not be more like him in Israel. And anyway, I think that's pretty much the end of the story. So my point is simply, he brought out the point, right? He said, this simple person, or this ugly person, if you want to call it that, he brought out the point. God created everything. So everything is incredibly significant. Everything has an eternal quality to it. Everything has, a divinity to it. So with that in mind, nothing really seems insignificant anymore. Everything is playing its particular role. So there's no room for putting things down and thinking that things should just be destroyed, or we don't need this. There's no really room for that. When a person realizes a clarity of understanding that God is the creator and a divine providence at every moment, in other words, that means that God didn't just create things and disappear. But he also is involved in the functioning continuously. So all creatures, from worms in the soil till eagles in the sky and the stars in the heavens, and all kinds of people in the world, everyone has their function. Everything also has their talent that other people don't have. So it's not such a complicated recognition, but it's hard to internalize maybe to a certain extent. And this is going to become natural, with the Messianic age, with this deep recognition of God being present in the world. Everyone will understand this. And the nations also, that's the idea. They'll come to the sukkah because they'll have a certain humility and this kind of, how do I say, this impulse of competition and envy of Israel will fade. And they'll understand that Israel has its specific role by God. And they'll also recognize that role is a tremendous advantage to them. That's a tremendous advantage. That's a tremendous gift given to them. Israel acts as a deeper bridge between God and his creation, between humanity. That's a tremendous gift given to them. and the understanding that the children of Israel had to go through so many trials and different difficulties, being the bearer of this mission, will be appreciated at the end of the days. So that's the sukkah. The sukkah is the place in which we look around, we look up towards heavens, and we look all around, and there's a kind of an idea of like you see God. In other words, the actual roof is a heavenly thing. It's a mitzvah, right? You're looking up at it and you see it. The walls act of protection you could see. In other words, it represents a recognition of godliness, a recognition that we'll recognize it. It'll be integrated as something that we're going to sense in the Messianic age and beyond. And that will bring, obviously, and that'll bring everyone together. So that's why the sukkah represents unity, because it represents transcendence. And it represents humility through transcendence. So the person's recognition of God and God's role in everything and so on, everyone is able to work together. So, okay. Any questions or comments on anything?